Well, hello everybody, welcome back. This session we're going to be looking at social media. That's what the name of the chapter is, chapter 24 in our textbook. Now, this chapter used to be called social networking sites. So the first thing I want to do is talk about why did they change the name of the chapter? Is it social media or is it social networking? Well, let's take a look at the definitions. You see there where social media has to do with forms of electronic communication through which users create online communities to share information, ideas, personal messages, and other content, such as videos. Whereas social networking, and usually when we talk about social networking, we talk about social networking sites. But you use these sites for the creation and maintenance of personal and business relationships online. Of course, you can do social networking offline, but social networking sites have to do with websites, okay? Now, as a matter of fact, one of the ways we can look at what the differences between social media and social networking sites is we can imagine what we talked about with the internet and the World Wide Web. You remember that we can say that when we're on the World Wide Web, okay, we're on the internet. We're using the World Wide Web, we're on the internet. But when we're using the internet, we're not necessarily on the World Wide Web. Same thing is true with social media and social networking sites. We can be using social media and we can be on a social networking site. And if we're on a social networking site, we're doing social media. But we might be doing social media and not be on a social networking site. Okay, I probably have you all confused now, but there is a slight difference between social media and social networking, just so you're clear. This word social media is used much more frequently now. It used to be used, say, before 2010, the common word was social networking. But now we use social media most of the time. But let's just think about what a social networking site is to help us understand why we've made this change in nomenclature. There are three criteria you have to meet to be a social networking site. The first one is that you have to construct a public or semi-public profile within a bounded system. Now, what does that mean? Okay, think of it this way. You have to have a login. You're going to put your name and some information about yourself in a profile. And then you are going to log in to that site so that your profile then will kick in and your name will be flashed on the screen or whatever that site does. It's going to be public or semi-public. And that means that either you can make it so everybody can see what you have to say or that you can have some people see what you have to say. The second criterion would be that you must articulate a list of other users that can actually look at your stuff. You have friends on Facebook. You have followers on Twitter. They are people that are going to share your connection, share what it is that you are putting up there, because these are the people that you are being friendly with, that you are connecting with, okay? And then third, you have to have a way for them to negotiate around the site so they can see the stuff that you're putting up and so that you can see the post that they're putting up. So you can see you have these three criteria, okay? You have to have this infrastructure and you have to have ways that you have to have people that you can connect to, and then you have to have ways to do it, okay? So now if we look at these particular icons, for example, we'll see that there are several icons here that are all social media icons. Some of them are social networking sites, some of them aren't. But they're all social media. So just as an example, we would say Facebook would be a classic example of a social networking site, okay? Because you log in there, you have a profile, you have friends, and you have to move around and look at your friends' posts, they look at yours. And then there's YouTube. Well, you can just go to YouTube. You don't have to log in anything to look at YouTube, you see. But it's still social media, okay? And that's where we're going with this. And I want you to keep in mind that we're interested in the social ramifications, the social effects of technology on the way we live. And so this is a really important thing that we're going to see how there's been a transformation actually. Let's look at this, for example. If we look at the red circle, this is the peer-to-peer communications. This is the kind of stuff that you would do if you're talking to somebody one-on-one. You send a mail, you might send them fax, you Skype them, you might call them on a telephone. All these would be one-to-one conversations where it would be peer-to-peer communication. If you look on the blue circle, you'll see where it says mass media. Mass media, of course, is you are basically listening to what some mass media entity is going to tell you. It's a newspaper, it's a radio, it's a TV, whatever. So you do a lot of listening, but not very much talking. In a social networking site, you do a lot of talking and a lot of listening. You do both. Okay, so on the left-hand side, we have peer-to-peer communication. On the right-hand side, we have mass media, which seem to be very, very distant from each other. But where they converge there in the middle, we have social media. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc. Those are places where you can do both of these things, that you can both do mail, you can have one-to-one correspondence or one-to-one communication with people, but also you can present published news. And here's where we're going to get to what makes social media different than mass media, and that is that the user can create the content. We don't have to wait for a mass media company like a magazine or a radio to create the content. We can create it. That's the big difference between social media and mass media. But of course, there is some overlap. There is some slopping in back and forth because a lot of mass media entities will put things on social media sites. Okay, you find them on Twitter and Facebook all the time. Okay, so there is some blurring there, let's say, of what is mass media, what is social media sometimes. But that's one way that we can think about this, I believe. Okay, so this is where we are right now. And I said a while ago, we're interested in the social ramifications. Where did we used to be with these social networking sites? Okay, let's look at it prehistorically, I'm calling it. First one started way back with bulletin board systems. This is when people had a computer. You would call up with a modem on your computer. You'd call somebody else up. You'd call another computer up and you'd leave a message on that computer, and then you would hang up, and then somebody else would get on their modem and they would make a phone call. Now, anymore, you folks may not even know what a modem is, okay, because nobody uses them anymore. Don't have to most of the time. You do know what a modem is coming into your house. You have a modem that connects you to the outside world. Well, used to be you had to have one in every computer. Okay, you don't have to do it anymore. But anyway, bulletin board systems were very popular back in the 70s. And they were invented in the 70s and used in the 70s and 80s. And basically what would happen is I'd have an interest in some particular topic. Let's say I'm interested in hunting deer. Okay. Then I would go to a bulletin board system and I'd put up comments about hunting deer. Whatever it might be. I might talk about a good place to go. I might talk about a shotgun. I might talk about certain type of shotgun shells, whatever. Okay. So, but I would have an interest and I would be putting up what I'm interested in so other people could read about it. Then came along CompuServe. This was a mainframe system, and Jeff Wilkins, who was working for an insurance company, decided, hey, I can, have my customers talk to each other and create a community. And that's what he did, using a mainframe computer. He's wildly successful. It's called time sharing, where everybody would share time on the computer. You just call in again on the phone and make your connections. Unfortunately, this company didn't roll with the flow, and so they got bought out in the 90s. They didn't stay up with what was going on. AOL actually bought them out. AOL was another social networking site, one of the first ones. It started back in the 80s, and it was very successful up until it was actually bought by Verizon just a few years ago. But these were the ones back in the 80s. These were the old guys, the first social networking sites. Now we can skip forward to the 2000s where there was the World Wide Web had been invented, and now people are using the World Wide Web to do all this stuff. First one of these was started in 1997 and lasted about 2001. That was 6degrees.com. This was a sort of a game you would play, 6 degrees. Everybody's connected by 6 degrees. There's 6 people that you would know. That was a concept. What they did here was they actually invited people to start the site, and then you would have to get an invitation to join. You couldn't just join. You had to be invited. And it got very successful. It eventually was purchased by a company for about 125 million, and the company just basically shut them down. I don't know why they bought them for so much, but they just want to shut them down. But anyway, that was the very first site. Went out of business in 2001. Then along came Friendster, which was very similar to what Facebook is. But you can see that their motto was Friendster is an online community that connects people through networks of friends for dating or making new friends. It was all about connections, making friends, okay? Then along came MySpace. MySpace lets you share photos, journals, and interests with your growing network of mutual friends. Now, in addition to just doing text message like Friendster lets you do, now MySpace is going to let you do journals and photos in addition. Again, because to people who had similar interests. This is what MySpace did. Then you had the Facebook, which is now we call just Facebook. But originally it was an online directory that connects people through social networks at colleges. It was restricted to colleges. First, it was restricted to Harvard College. Then it was restricted. They just had colleges. Colleges kept joining, and then of course they finally lifted that, so anybody in the world can join. And now they've got literally billions of people that are using Facebook. But the point was connecting with other people. Twitter came along, the global community of friends and strangers answering the simple question, "What are you doing?" That's what you did on Twitter. What are you doing? Oh, I'm having lunch. What are you doing? I'm going to work. I'm talking to my friends. That's what you did. Now you ask what's happening, what's going on here. But that was the same idea. You're talking to your friends. You had your followers. You'd send notes out to them, etc. So that's where we come up to. This gets us to around 2010 with what social networking sites were all about. Okay. Now, just so we can see what's going on now, and this is actually, this data was a couple years old, but it gets the point across. I want to show how Facebook is by far the leading social networking site in the world. After Facebook, you can look at YouTube. YouTube is not really going to fit the criteria for a social networking site, but it's social media, and it's the second largest entity there. And then you have some of the other ones I have there. I want to just point out, for example, WhatsApp, which is a messaging system, mostly. That's basically what it is. You can make phone calls, you can send video and that kind of thing with it now, but it's basically a network, a messaging service. It was purchased by Facebook. It's and WhatsApp is used all over the world, of course. It was purchased by Facebook. And Facebook also has Facebook Messenger. So those two items, WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, both do the same thing pretty much. WeChat does the same thing as Facebook Messenger, except it does it for another very large social networking site in China, which is called QQ. Then you can see there's Twitter and there's Snapchat. Couldn't think it. And so you can say those are the major. When you talk about social media, these are the major sites that people are thinking about. We can see how the usage goes. Here's where you see Facebook from like 2012 on up. It keeps continuing to get more people joining, which is true with all these sites. Every one of us is growing. Pinterest, Twitter, LinkedIn, they're all getting bigger. More and more people are joining. People in the United States, over 70% of the adults in the United States have been on Facebook. And most of the people say they have one of these sites that they follow. And many of them are getting their news from these websites, from these social networking sites. Yes. If we break this down by age, and this is another chart that came out of the book, you can see where the people 18 to 29, there's been a slight downward, there's been a decline slightly starting in about 2015, where a lot of people, it's still growing. It was still growing up at that point, and some of the younger people decided they weren't as interested in using Facebook and some of the other websites, some of the other social networking sites, and instead they started switching to some different sites. But you can see that people from 50 to 20 to 64, there's an upward trend for sure. All these, most of them are. People 65 and over, they leveled off a little bit, but that changes every once in a while. mostly we can see that more and more people are using the social media sites, and that's the point. More people using them, and they're not using them for what they were originally meant for, which was to make connections. They're using them to get news. Here's an example of this that I'll just share with you. If you've ever seen the movie Sully, which is about the guy airplane pilot who landed a plane in the Hudson River. Well, this is a picture taken by a person using Twitter, sent it out on Twitter when it first happened. It was the first news about this accident that anybody got. It was a guy standing on the side of the river, and he sent it out on Twitter. You see, Twitter you can send as a micro blogging system where you can send out messages up to 280 characters. It's used a lot for news, but for other things as well. But it wasn't designed for news, but that's what it's used for. It's difficult to monitor by governments, but our president uses it. He said that it helped get him elected. And as we all know, he's sent out thousands of tweets since he's been president. Okay, let me end here by mentioning one other thing that, again, showing that I'm interested and focused on the social ramifications of this technology. The sharing, this is all about sharing information, sharing your ideas, your personal thoughts, etc. Well, sometimes your employers will go to these social networking sites and take a look at what you're doing. Sometimes your employer, if you want to have certain access to things at your company, will require you to give them their password so they can get on your social networking site, see what you're up to. So this is something that was not expected originally. Another thing is that the people's privacy is in jeopardy when they share things on social networking sites. Facebook tries to create more privacy, but oftentimes they end up putting their foot in their mouth and opening up your information to more people. Twitter just sort of makes everything public in the first place. MySpace tried to give you choices. Anyway, the point is that your privacy is in jeopardy. Now, another thing is sex offenders. Sex offenders can get on the websites, find out, and they can try to pursue young kids mostly on the websites. Sometimes sex offenders can be posted on the websites that this guy's a sex offender, he lives in your neighborhood, and maybe he's not. So that's a problem. But most of the problem is that you have sex offenders on the sites. So the police also use the sites to find out about criminals. The criminals use the sites to find out about, you send a note saying, hey, I'm going on vacation. I'm going to be in Bahamas for a week. Guess what? Criminal sees that online. He just goes, he can rob your house. So there's a lot of things that we need to be aware of here that affect us that we didn't anticipate when we first started using these social networking sites. Okay, that'll take us to the end of this discussion. This is an overview. You want to make sure you read the book. There's some things in the book that I didn't talk about here. Okay, but anyway, I'll stop here, and I'll talk to you next time. Probably talk to you about some social networking advertising.